Our next speaker is going to be Joshua James, who's an instructor at Fayetteville Tech, and he's going to be talking about why we're here at the Arsenal on these grounds.
So you have to forgive me, my printer isn't working, so I had to bring the phone instead. But I'm really excited that this is happening here in Fayetteville, because a lot of us, maybe a majority of us, are not from Fayetteville originally. I'm from North Carolina, but I'm not from Fayetteville. And you're in a bizarre place if you didn't notice. Fayetteville is unique, and I've spent 5 years here and have come to appreciate the city for the fact that it is unique, that it is bizarre, it's weird, it's strange. And part of that is where we're standing right now, which is the Arsenal. This was originally the pride of Fayetteville before the Civil War. Not because of its military nature, but because it was almost a community center. The Arsenal itself was built for two reasons. Part of it was the War of 1812, but part of it was also white fear of slave uprisings, spurred on by Nat Turner's rebellion. And the citizens of Fayetteville wanted a place where they could feel more secure in their property and in their privilege. But according to one woman who actually wrote an account of Fayetteville during the Civil War, she said that the Arsenal was the handsomest collection of buildings in the city. And so for a lot of people, they didn't even realize that it was a center of war. People had picnics on the ground here. They gathered together. Of course, bear in mind they were white people, because of course if you were black, you were not gathering in any groups larger than probably 2 or 3. But when North Carolina made the mistake of seceding from the Union, an informal militia gathered downtown and marched up, came out to the Arsenal here, where federal troops were stationed. Because their intention was, now that North Carolina has seceded, this was going to be Confederate property. Oddly enough, it was taken without any violence. The federal troops surrendered, saluted the flag, pulled the colors down, and were allowed passage back to D.C. After that point, the Arsenal ceased to be a place of entertainment and amusement. It was turned over to the Confederate government and the manufacture of rifles to the Confederate Army. In 1865, it was destroyed by General Sherman as he came through the city. Also destroyed were the offices of the Fayetteville Observer, because Sherman didn't like the media. Fake news. He also felt that the Observer was too supportive of the Confederacy, so it took a while for them to come back, but they did eventually after the war was over. The ruins were salvaged. Some of the ruins of the Arsenal actually formed parts of the houses in town, but it largely sat unused after that point, and the federal government didn't invest its war money in Fayetteville again until they built that little post out there known as Fort Bragg. Alright, so that's history. I'm an English instructor, not a history instructor, but I have other interests. Originally, these ruins were much larger until the former Confederate Arsenal was cut in half by a freeway named after Dr. Martin Luther King. How's that for irony? But Fayetteville itself, often maligned because of Vietnam, still beleaguered by economic and racial disparity today, is also the 11th most diverse metropolitan area in the United States out of 150 metropolitan areas. New York is 9th. And a lot of people don't realize that. And it makes sense. Obviously, Fort Bragg contributes a lot to that. Everyone is from different backgrounds, whether you're from Fayetteville or not. And I always impress that on my students when we get together the first day. I say, where are you from? What do you consider your hometown? And wide range of answers. You know, Philippines, done, Hope Mills, Germany, you know, foreign exotic places like that. 42% of the population of North Carolina was born out of the state. Probably higher here in Fayetteville. But racial and class segregation is still very much alive, and you can just look at a map of the demographics of this city to see that. But despite all of these local issues, and because of the unaddressed and untreated national sicknesses that many people have always been aware of, but that many of us are just now becoming aware of, we have gathered here on a site dedicated to war in a city buoyed by a war economy, where racial, economic, and social injustice have often formed the foundation of civic life. A city where the death of the textile industry left the residents of Massey Hill just down south here without homes or hope. A city where retail and food service seems to just grow out of the ground. And a city where racial tensions during World War II were so high that many soldiers were killed here rather than overseas. We're in the arsenal right now for Charlottesville, but something much more than Charlottesville. Our country suffers from a deep, deep disease. And if you've seen the pictures from Charlottesville, you've seen the twisted, malicious, terrified anger and rage, and we can't pretend it's new. It may be new to some of us because for the first time in our lives, we're being targeted by it. But for a lot of people, this has been daily life. I'm white. The police don't see me, and I don't see them usually. I might as well be invisible, especially when I wear a tie and stuff like that. It's like I'm just wearing an invisibility cloak. And I have to at least understand that. That doesn't necessarily mean that I haven't earned what I have, but that does mean that the obstacles that I had to overcome would be different had I been born differently. We can't pretend that this violence, that these issues aren't tied up in our national fabric, though. It's a violence that sweats from the brick and mortar of our justice system and our economy. And I'm rambling, and I apologize, and I do that to ask my students, but I'll leave you with Dr. King because other people want to speak too. And his legacy has been fairly whitewashed and sanitized, so much so that we don't realize how beautifully dangerous he was. And so these are his words, not mine. When machines and computers, profit motives, and property rights are considered more important than people, the giant triplets of racism, materialism, and militarism are incapable of being conquered. Thank you.
Thank you, Josh, for those words.